Hello everybody, Alec Alger the Side Quest Gamer here, and today I got a very special treat for you guys. Today I will be ranking my top 10 all-time favorite Castlevania games. Now for this list, I will be excluding spin-offs and 3D Castlevania games. Spin-offs would include like the Kid Dracula series for the Game Boy. And while the 3D Castlevania games, although the one Kojima produced was pretty good, it wasn't Castlevania. So anyways, without further ado, we're going to do my top 10 favorite Castlevania games.
The top 10 best Castlevania games, in my opinion. Number 10, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest for the NES. If the internet taught you anything, Simon's Quest is one of the most despised sequels to a game franchise. But is it really that bad? There are others like me who actually like this game. Sure, it may not be as good as the first Castlevania, but as a game on its own, it's fantastic. The story reveals in the instructions manual that before our hero Simon Belmont killed Count Dracula, Dracula gave Simon a curse that would progress later through the years, and this game takes place years later after the first game, and Simon Belmont has to go around Transylvania from town to mansion to mansion, to gather clues as to how to undo this curse. Why do I like it? Because instead of it being from stage to stage, this sequel has you actually explore the world of Transylvania, and in my opinion, it's the most immersive of the Castlevania series. What a terrible night to have a curse is the main complaint, but it adds to the atmosphere because the curse is not only slowly killing Simon Belmont, but it's also presumably allowing Dracula's minions to track him down and kill him. And at night, and when you have this curse, these enemies are more powerful than their daytime counterparts. It actually gives you a sense of fear and desperation as you're low on health, and then all of a sudden it's night, and you're trying to avoid dying so you can keep all the hearts you acquire to buy better weapons and power-ups. Anyways, I like the action RPG elements added in this game, and like Zelda 2, it's highly underrated, but be sure to get a walkthrough if you're playing this game, or at least a Red Action fan update of Simon's Quest, since no one deceives you in that game and actually gives you helpful advice, and the day and night transformations is less annoying and goes by faster. So I say nuts to conformity, because I like this game. Number 9, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge for the Game Boy. Ah, the Game Boy. What a classic little black and white handheld. It told the colored Sega Game Gear that you don't need color to have better sales. I mean, the Game Boy had quality games, and the one super weapon Sega did not have, and that is a long battery life. However, the Game Boy was still a handheld with its limitations, and as a result, Castlevania The Adventure for the Game Boy could have been great if it wasn't so darn laggy, but that's okay, because the sequel, which is called Belmont's Revenge, fixes that problem. Castlevania The Adventure starred Christopher Belmont, and in Belmont's Revenge, you play as Chris's son Soleil, if I pronounce that right, and you have to finish the job Chris started. While Chris killed Dracula, Dracula would only return, and as Soleil, you have to do it again. But why is this game so special to even have a place on this list? 2 words, DuckTales. What, you don't know what I mean? Okay, I mean, you start off with 4 levels to choose from, and the levels are pretty darn big, like in DuckTales. It's a pretty unique gimmick for a classic linear Castlevania game, so instead of progressing through 6 different levels, with each one coming after the other, you get 4 levels to choose from the start. And hey, it works! So give it a try sometime, you won't regret it. Number 8, Castlevania for the NES. No, not the terrible Castlevania 64. I mean the game that started this fantastic franchise, Castlevania for the NES. Why is it good? Well, because it's linear, it has relentless bosses, it has tricky platforming, it has basically started the franchise, and whether it be linear or Metroidvania, Both genres of the franchise follow the groundwork the original set up. While it didn't age quite as well as its sequels, well, except for Simon's Quest, it's still so much fun, and it's definitely in my top 20 favorite NES games. Number 7, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin for the Nintendo DS. This game definitely deserves a spot on this list because fans love it and DS owners treasure it. By the looks of the gameplay, it's a 2D Metroidvania game with a well-crafted story and interesting characters. The graphics for the characters are really manga-esque, which isn't a bad thing, but this game is definitely lower on my list because it's more geared towards the fans of the series rather than newcomers. It's kind of a love child between Symphony of the Night and Aria of Sorrow, but doesn't have the same charm as its predecessors had. I'm sorry to say. But it's on this list because it's a really good game worth checking out for DS owners. Number 6, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow for the Game Boy Advance. Like the Game Boy Advance had a lot of franchise experiments gone wrong. But Aria of Sorrow is the best Game Boy Advance Castlevania game, as well as one of the handheld's best games, period. It's the first Castlevania game where the characters are actually believable, and not just some heroic archetypes you see in the other entries. You play as a foreign exchange student in Japan known as Soma Cruz, if I pronounced that correctly, who's accompanied by his friend, and they wander towards a solar eclipse near a shrine, and boom! He appears in Dracula's castle. Now the castle has teleportation, but this game does take place in 2035, so the future's looking good if castles have vortex technology. The game introduces the soul capture system, where Soma can acquire the abilities of his defeated foes, kind of like Mega Man, but these are just the abilities from standard enemies like bats and skeletons. But the level design, while not as memorable as Symphony of the Night, is really good and pretty memorable. It's definitely a must-have for your Game Boy Advance, and if you don't get it, then just stay indoors with the newest copy and paste Call of Duty sequel, while us gamers enjoy every moment of Aria of Sorrow. Number 5, Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis. Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and if you've seen my review of this game, you know what I'm talking about. Seriously, this game is pretty gruesome, especially with Eric Lecard's death animation. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping my opinion of this game, but if all you need to know is that it's linear, you get to play as two different characters, you'll probably play as Eric Lecard since John Morris sucks, and it's hard even on the easy difficulty. But it has nice graphics even by today's standards, and it's a lot of fun. It's Castlevania, and you know that Konami will give you your money's worth. Try it out sometime. Plus, Mishiro Yamane does the music. Have you played Castlevania Symphony of the Night? Well, guess what? That's a sequel to Rondo of Blood. That's right, North America. This game was released for the PC Engine in Japan only, which is what they call the TurboGrafx 16. It borrows a few pages from Castlevania 3 for the NES, where there's alternate paths and levels, you can play as another character, and there's alternate endings. Except that now Dracula kidnapped 3 maidens, plus a young girl who's a self-proclaimed vampire hunter. Spoiler alert, she isn't lying. Even though she's 12-year-old, she kicks butt. If you rescue Maria, you get to play as her, and she is arguably more powerful than the game's main protagonist, Richter Belmont, which is sad because he's supposed to be the most powerful of the Belmont clan. But it's a fantastic game, and thankfully it's now available dirt cheap on the Dracula X Chronicles on the PlayStation Network for the PS Vita. Or you can get the hard copy used for the PSP, but just download it. Trust me, it has a remake of Rondo of Blood along with the original translated into English, as well as including the sequel, Symphony of the Night. 3 games for the half of price of 1 game, and that's a deal, especially for the North American Castlevania fans who always wanted this game for so long. Number 3, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse for the NES. Other than the confusing subtitle that seems to be meant for Simon's Quest, since there really isn't any curse, except that for Dracula, his curse is always getting killed by a Belmont, or at least someone of the Belmont descent, or not even a Belmont at all. I mean, he was killed by his own son, Alucard, twice. But it's a prequel to the first two Castlevania games for the NES, where Simon Belmont's ancestor, Trevor Belmont, sets out to end Dracula's hold on Wallachia, and this by far is one of the hardest games in the series. I am not kidding. That darn clock tower is no pushover, but let's go over why this game is so high on my list. There's around 11 levels, as well as alternate levels and paths. There's also other playable characters like Grant Dynasty, who can climb on the ceiling and throw knives. There's also Sypha Belnatus, who is a witch who later becomes Trevor's wife, and therefore introducing magic to the Belmont bloodline. She can freeze water into a solid platform, and she can also cast spells. And there's also the half-vampire son of Dracula named Alucard, who vowed to protect humans. He can fly and cast fireballs. The game returns to the linear formula, but probably for the better. Although I liked Simon's Quest, none can argue that it didn't feel quite right. But this game is so much fun and has the best cast of heroes in the entire series, in my opinion. Number 2, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation. What? You thought after 1 week I'm going to change my mind about this game not being the best Castlevania game? Sorry, but it's still one of my favorites in the series, and was the first in the series to utilize the Metroidvania style, which surprisingly worked. The game had you play as a different-looking Alucard, who is out to destroy the castle so that his father won't be able to harm humans again. I dare say that this game is like the Ocarina of Time for the Castlevania series in terms of fans coming into the franchise, as well as a departure that left veterans either to stay or leave, while new fans came piling in. Like Ocarina of Time, I also don't think that's the best in the series. But I have to say, Symphony of the Night did nearly everything right. It had arguably the best boss battles, with some of them returning from previous entries. Remember fighting the skeletal bird and the dragon creatures in Super Castlevania 4? Well, now you get to fight them together! But even together, they're a lot easier than in Super Castlevania 4. The game had a lot going for it, and it's truly amazing. I love this game so much, and even though it's tricky, it's a fair game and took me only a week to get to the final boss, which I won't spoil, but you'll probably be able to detect a pattern from the list. Seriously, everyone, who is the final boss of every Castlevania game? Now, you may be asking, what's my number 1 favorite Castlevania game of all time? Well, don't kill me for saying this, but it is number 1, Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo. This game is everything we love to hate about the NES trilogy gone. Well, except for the knockback, but this game has an 8-directional whip, the best level design in the series, great boss battles, memorable music with some of the music being remixed from all 3 Castlevania games for the NES. It's just perfect. I mean, this is the game where all the problems addressed are fixed, and adds a few new gimmicks of its own, like the grapple hooks you can swing on, which can be overused in later levels, but this by far is the perfect Castlevania game, and it's also the most fun to play. You spend half the game trying to get to the castle, and the rest of the game in the castle. The final boss battle with Dracula is epic, and I barely scratched the surface of this game. Please tune in this Halloween so I can defend my position on the Castlevania series from lovers of Symphony of the Night. Don't knock it until you try it. But maybe you can look at Super Castlevania 4 in a different way. So be sure to tune in for my full review of the game.
Now keep in mind, this top 10 list is just my opinion. I mean, keep in mind, all these games on this top 10 list are really good and worthy of being someone's all-time favorites. So don't be angry about my personal preferences. So, comment question. What is your favorite Castlevania game? Give me your top 10 or just your all-time favorite. Or even a few of your favorites. I would really like to know. I mean, there are probably a bunch of Castlevania games I have not tried out yet. I mean, I haven't played the Kid Dracula series. I want to, but I haven't gotten around to it. And I still haven't played The Adventure Rebirth. I heard that was pretty good. Now, thank you all again for watching this video. If you want me to elaborate on why I consider Super Castlevania 4 to be my all-time favorite and the best in the series, well, tune in October 31st, and I will give you many reasons why I love this game. So if you like this video, please subscribe, like, share, grow my audience a bit, and remember to stay awesome.